Hello, this is Patrick Ash. I am author and nonprofit program evaluator and hard rock heavy metal enthusiast, guitarist person, and that's the one I'm going to focus on with this video. I'm going to try my hand at doing an album ranking and maybe do a few more. I'm also trying, I got a little bit of a little cheap light thing, maybe that makes videos better looking, I don't know. So let's start with Metallica, a all-time great band, one of my all-time favorite metal bands. It sometimes feels a little embarrassing because they're, like the go-to big name in metal, and yet some of my other favorite metal bands are obscure, a little obscure, like Lacrimosa symphonic metal band from Switzerland is one of my favorites, along with US-based power metal bands like Judicator and Helium Prime, and just list goes on. Lots of metal bands that I love to pieces, that are very riffy, and yet I keep coming back to the big name Metallica. Seen them I think 5 or 6 times in concert, and never disappoint. Absolutely awesome. They were a main inspiration when I picked up guitar, and so yeah. And if you're watching this, then you're probably also an enthusiast, or you're just up for me blathering on about my favorite crap. All right, so let's do an album ranking. I'm gonna try to keep this under half an hour. You will know from the runtime whether or not I succeeded. So let's start. I'm gonna start from the bottom and work our way up. I'm gonna be doing kind of like the only the studio albums. So let's start at the bottom with, of course, Lulu. Kind of infamous, and I think it's probably the bottom of many people's lists. And for me, there's something personal here because Lulu, of course, is based on the writings of Frank Wedekind, and who I actually am distantly related to. And so I was already familiar with his work, and he was kind of like a lurid, playwright. We have some of his works, and so I was already familiar with Frank Wedekind before Lulu came out. I was like, why are they writing this based on, okay, whatever. Obviously a huge fan of Metallica, also a fan of Lou Reed. Lou Reed, of course, Velvet Underground, amazing albums and songs. I used to, when I would do acoustic sets, I used to play Satellite of Love. But this is a case of sometimes the whole is less than the sum of its parts. People said it would grow. Even David Bowie came out and said that it was a great album. It would be people would, learn to love. What did he say? Like they would learn to appreciate it or something like that. And then friggin' Lars Ulrich defends it as like, well, in his Lars way, like people just don't appreciate obscure German playwright. Like, I've known about this dude for a long time, and the problem is the album sucks. It's okay. Why does it suck more particularly? It's because it's trying to blend things that just don't work together. Spoken word, poetry based upon these writings, that could work. Some few hard metal or hard rock heavy metal riffs, that could work as well. But yet, Lulu. Sorry, I just got distracted. Our cat keeps coming in. But the problem is with Lulu is that it never takes off. I've tried a few times. It feels stream of consciousness in a bad way, and I think many people, like, it tries to be abstract, it tries to be experimental, and the thing about experimental is it's either very brave or very stupid. In this case, I think it still falls into very stupid. It's, I would say, unlistenable at times. And so, sorry, I'm gonna get my kitty cat to go away and go to the bed. So yeah, if you've heard it, you know what I'm talking about. It just, the riffs, they're there, they just don't work. It's not cohesive, and so yeah, just not a fan. I'm with the consensus. I think a lot of my picks will be pretty consensus, but there's gonna be a few exceptions. All right, get that out of the way. Now, of course, Saint Anger. Number, I guess was, I used a list that had like other like EPs and live albums, so not the right number. So at the bottom is Lulu. Next step up would be Saint Anger. So Saint Anger, of course, also somewhat infamous, with Lars turning off that snare drum using pong pong trash can sounding drums, and they were trying to go for a garage band sound. It seemed very intentional, and I've seen, like, I actually enjoyed the Some Kind of Monster, whatchamacallit, documentary, and I think Bob Rock at one point said, "We need to show people that this band just doesn't lighten up." It's like, this is freaking Metallica. At that point, they'd already been around for almost 2 decades, and or I think about 2 decades at that point, and they'd proven what they were capable of, and just anyway. So I actually thought, and this is an unpopular opinion, I actually thought some of the lyrics do work, even the frantic tick tick. I think some of it was meant to be in a kind of crazed, unhealthy mindset, and trying to break out of that, and that's where James Hetfield was coming from. But it still just doesn't have very much that's memorable. I feel like that's kind of the big issue with Saint Anger's, and a lot of it is just very kind of blends in. Like, I can listen to it, which is better than Lulu. It's just a lot of it still doesn't work, and so yeah. Saint Anger has a few memorable. I actually thought recently with their new S&M performance that version of All Within My Hands actually works quite well. And so that's an example of where they were experimental and it worked. I felt like by adding the orchestral parts, it just had more flavors to it. It wasn't really metal at that point. It's more like a sort of a hard rock jam with the symphony. But I thought that it was somewhat effective, and surprisingly so. So it's got a few good songs on it, but I mean, I like the title track. I like just a few cuts, but it's just it's an earache, I think, especially with that mixing. That mix just which I'll also mention on my next pick, which is Death Magnetic. So Death Magnetic at the time was seen as kind of a return to form after Saint Anger, and to some degree that works. I think it has several songs that do work very well. I'm a big fan of The Day That Never Comes. I think is fantastic. It's also kind of like Saint Anger. It's very emotive. You can kind of feel the emotions behind the lyrics, and the song really builds to a crescendo. And then it kind of has like a chaotic outro. Very, very cool. I also like Unforgiven 3, actually. I think it's kind of ingenious the way you go from Unforgiven 1, 2, and 3, and it's like similar theme, but different. It's like first, second, and third person, but sort of in reverse. It's like Unforgiven, the original, was about kind of society at large. Unforgiven 2 was kind of like that dyad, that person to person, and then Unforgiven 3 is about the self. When it's me, I can't forgive, and so it's kind of it's genius the way that progression works, and I think also musically, it's one of the more haunting pieces I think they've ever done, which made it appropriate when they did the version with the symphony. Thought that was very cool. So yeah, those were two songs I actually think are great songs. All Nightmare Long is good, and That Was Just Your Life, My Apocalypse, all solid songs. And then a lot of the rest of it for me was fairly forgettable, like the Broken, Beaten, and Scarred, and Judas Kiss, and I think the one not great instrumental being what's it? Suicide and Redemption, I think it's called. This is one of the ones I don't have the album. And I will say, just on the mixing, it's got what we call the Rick Brick from Rick Rubin. The mix really does, it doesn't just make it a less enjoyable experience. I would even say it kind of ruins the experience. I know there's the Guitar Hero versions, and thank goodness there are kind of some live versions in the S&M ones so that you can hear the songs in ways that are actually enjoyable. But the album as is, that and this I'll say this is a problem with Metallica is sometimes they just don't give the fans what they want. People beg for, like, let's hear Justice for All with bass, let's hear let's re-release Death Magnetic with that better mix. But I guess sometimes, especially with the whole Napster thing, that's a can of worms. But I will say, like, does Metallica really like their fans? Or do they have a little bit of antipathy towards them? I'm not sure if that's more or less metal, but whatever. You be the judge. Yeah, so overall, I would say it's a good album with several great songs, and then it's got some forgettable songs, and that brick of a mix is just, it's sad. It's sad. All right, so now we'll get into the albums that I actually own. Next one up is Reload. Yes, Reload. And I think many people put this toward the bottom of their... Oh, you can see the reflection of my little cheapo light there. I'll put it up higher. A lot of people put this toward the bottom because it's kind of seen as filler. A lot of it is filler, to be fair, but I think it holds up somewhat well. The thing about both Load and Reload is that I think they're versus the previous albums I mentioned, they're more listenable, I think. They're ones that you can revisit and got some decent hooks. I mean, of course, you've got Fuel and Memory Remains. Even Devil's Dance, I thought with S&M was a good version. Unforgiven 2, as I mentioned before. And then after that point, I think people will say, well, now we get into, filler songs. But some of them have a decent hook, like I think those of you who have seen the Cutting Stunts video, which was, I used to work out to that I'd stick the VHS, really dating myself here. I'd pop that in high school, and I'd, work out a little bit, and they would start with that riff. I was like, that's an awesome riff. And it was the riff for Bad Seed, which I think is a pretty good song. But then, toward the end, Low Man's Lyric, Prince Charming, they're okay, but it is kind of a fillery album. Fixer's a good song, though. So I think both Load and Reload have some strong closing songs. Obviously, Fuel is one of their staples. That's kind of a dumb, fun song, I guess. But overall, I think it's solid. It's fillery, but it's not, I wouldn't call it bad. I think it's a pretty good album. All right, so next up on my ranking from Reload is the most recent album, Hardwired to Self-Destruct. I think this is a overall very good album. A true kind of return to roots versus Death Magnetic. I think it was more mixed, but I think here they really are riff focused. It felt like they were going for what mindset they had in their early days of writing good riffs. However, this did not need to be a double album. Even the running time, I think, comes out to like 77 or 78 minutes, which you can fit on one disc. And that's one gripe. The other is, I think this honestly has more of a filler problem. Well, as much, maybe a little bit more than Reload does. It's just that the reason I rank it a little bit higher is I think some of the good songs are even better than on Reload. I mean, this first disc here with title track, Atlas Rise, Moth into Flame, and Hail on Fire, like all strong songs that are fun to re-listen to, and he's still being expressive, as I think Hetfield's lyrics are pretty strong in later days, and I'll even give him credit overall that he's just strengthened as a lyricist over the years. So I know we can all kind of say Metallica's heyday, their great music was in the 80s. I think, in some ways they've kind of matured and grown a bit since then. So yeah, I think the first disc has a lot of great songs. And then, of course, on the second disc, this is where we've got some real, filler after filler on the second disc. Confusion's decent, and Man Unkind, teasy name, but I think it's the one that starts with a cool bass from Robert. And Then Here Comes Revenge and My Savage Murder. It's like 3 filler songs in a row. They don't do much of anything for me. But then at the end, we're treated to Spell the Bone, which is a totally kick-ass song. I think a lot of people feel the same way. So I think if you were to just take Spit Out the Bone, maybe Confusion or a few other riffs and put them on that first disc, that would be a pretty awesome album. It's a very strong return in the sense of hearing these songs live. I saw them twice for this album. It was totally kick-ass. Very, very cool show. The songs worked well, and again, mentioning the symphony. I'm a fan of the S&M. I do think some other bands have worked as well or better with symphonies. But Yngwie comes to mind, and I'm blanking on, I mean, it's pure symphonic metal like Lacrimosa. Also, but when Metallica does it, wish they would emphasize the symphony more times, but some of these songs, though, on Hardwired really do work well in that context. All right, next up on the ranking is Load, which at the time it was already a little infamous when it came out because, of course, let me flip this around. Notice something different from Metallica of prior years. They cut their hair. It was so controversial. Even at the time, I was a teenager. I was like, who freaking cares if they cut their hair? I mean, I cut my hair. Believe it or not, I used to have hair in college down to here. It was red, and it also wasn't, balding. But the Load is actually pretty kick-ass hard rock album. I mean, let's be honest, during this time period, they were trying to be more experimental, and I think for the most part it works. And some of them are great hard rock songs. I think it starts off pretty strong, and Until It Sleeps, I remember really liking the moodiness of the video, and I think that's one of I think Metallica's kind of underrated quality is that, like, yeah, they're the popular metal band that has lots of riffs and kick-ass shows and all that, but they have kind of that atmospheric side, which I think is why their ballads work, whereas with other bands it sounds forced and cheesy. I'm sure someone out there is already saying Metallica's ballads are forced and cheesy too. Whatever. But yeah, and King Nothing, here, I actually like Hero of the Day. I think that's got some good riffs. One of the first riffs I ever learned to play, actually. I started playing roughly at the time this album came out. About like Bleeding Me, great song, works very well with the symphony, and Wasting My Hate I thought was cool. Thorn Within, it's a little bit of a sleeper track, but for some reason I keep coming back to that one. And Mama Said, it's a little country. They tried some country vibes there, but it works. Ronnie, I feel like they went a little too far there. Then we have The Outlaw Torn, which it's one of those, you can hate later day Metallica or Metallica after the 80s, but that is a very, very, very good song. Otherwise, I think there's some filler tracks earlier, like scattered throughout, 2x4 and House that Jack Built. Doesn't do much for me. Poor Twisted Me, it's okay. So overall, it's a really good, I mean, I often say 2/3 of Load is a great album, but about 1/3 of Reload. So if you were to just take the great songs and put them together, it would be a very awesome album. So I think Load is overall a great entry. Yeah, they were doing things differently, but I feel like overall, you can say that it's withstood the test of time. Whereas at the time, I still remember it was like, Metallica's not even a metal band anymore, which, it's a fair argument. But, so I actually think what's going to be more controversial is the ranking of my next two. All right, so my next album up is Kill 'Em All. Yes, their debut, and holy crap, as we know, it's full of awesome riffs. As they say, Mustaine wrote them all. Not really true. He wrote, several of these songs, of course, and they're great. But consistently awesome riffs throughout, whether it was Mustaine, Hetfield, but Hit the Lights, awesome song. The Four Horsemen. Then we have that amazing bass solo with Anesthesia Pulling Teeth. Rest in peace, Cliff Burton. Whiplash, Phantom Lord. You see, Phantom Lord, I'm not as crazy about that song. I think that is a Mustaine song. No Remorse. Love that. Very riffy track. It's fun to play. And Seek and Destroy, of course. It's very classic Metallica. I even enjoy Metal Militia. So you're like, all right, you're loving all over this album. Why is it not higher? Because a lot of people rank it at the top, especially if you're a big fan. You're like, that's what the true fans love, is Kill 'Em All. Why is it not higher for me? It has a problem that I think many debut albums have, that a lot of it's hero worship. And actually reminds me of the Killers of All Bands, where like a lot of fans love that first album, but it's just, I listen to it, I'm like, okay, yeah, they're inspired by, Diamond Head and Venom and all these other bands that we're listening to, and you can hear the influence so much so that you're like, they haven't come into their own yet. And it's like bothersome how much that's the case. So yeah, kick-ass riffs, great songs, good to listen to, and yet there's still moments where I'm just like, all right, okay, so this is when they were listening to that Am I Evil or one of the other songs that they cover on Garage Inc. And some of there's a few songs like Jump in the Fire I'm not super into, Phantom Lord like I mentioned. So overall it's a great album, but I do not think it cracks their, let's see here, top 4, so top 5 anyway. So somewhat controversially, what I put above Kill 'Em All is the Black Album. And of course, this is the one that even people who don't even really know Metallica or metal or much of it, they're like, oh yeah, Enter Sandman. That's so popular and well known. In fact, I even played it. I once covered it with a band when we did a like 90s party thing. They're like, Patrick, let's play a metal song. Like, I guess we'll do, because that's one of my earlier memories of all metals, hearing the Enter Sandman riff. Earlier than that was Black Sabbath, Paranoid, but anyway, so the reason I rank this higher than Kill 'Em All, because is it overproduced? Perhaps, yes, maybe. Is it kind of a victim of its own success, to a large degree? Are the songs overplayed? Yeah, they are. All that being said, I still find it has a lot of staying power. Even though I am kind of sick of hearing, singles like, obviously Enter Sandman, Sad But True, Wherever I May Roam. I haven't gotten a little sick of that one. But yet I still come back to songs like Holier Than Thou. The Unforgiven, I will say, is one of my favorite Metallica songs, period. And Nothing Else Matters is one of my favorite Metallica songs. Some people say it's heresy. That's, when they started becoming a ballad band. But I still feel like these are not just good Metallica songs, like they're good songs, period. I feel like the songwriting is strong, and the riffs are memorable. I think we keep hearing them because a lot of them do have staying power. And even though it feels a little overproduced, it's still, the songs are strong enough that it kind of doesn't matter. I think with whether you're a metal band or a rock band or whatever, when it's so overproduced that it kind of doesn't matter what the song is like. It's like, okay, this is a fun pop song, or this is a cool kick-ass metal song, and that's it. That's as far as you get. Whereas, like, you hear the first few notes of Sad But True, that drop D sound. You're like, okay, it gives you a feeling. It pulls you in. And then also in the album, of Wolf and Man, atmospheric, and I like that side of them, obviously. And again, Unforgiven and Nothing Else Matters, they're two of my all-time favorites because I feel like the songs are very expressive, and they work in how they're giving off a vibe, and they're just fun to play on guitar. But My Friend of Misery, that's fun to play on bass. You know, exactly that little interlude. It's something I keep going back to. Then ending with, I think, another sleeper track, The Struggle Within. That is a kick-ass song. It feels very, you know, you're starting with that kind of militaristic kind of drum intro, and it's just kick-ass. Like, I just keep coming back to the Black Album. It is overplayed. It is overproduced. These criticisms are legit. I can't disagree with them. And at the same time, I feel like it still has staying power. By some miracle. Like, I'm sick of a lot of it, but there's a lot of it I'm not sick of, if that makes sense. So, yeah. And also, there may be a little bit of, it's one of the first metal albums I ever heard. You know, but I've also kind of gone through phases where I've kind of ignored it, but I do come back. All right, top 3. This might even be more controversial. I don't know. But number 3, Master of Puppets. Yes. What for many people, it is their top pick. It is their number 1 pick for Metallica, maybe even number 1 pick for metal. And I will say, for many years, Master of Puppets was my number 1 for Metallica metal. You name it. Of course, packed full of riffs, packed full of some of their all-time best playing. I don't think that's you know, very controversial. And I mean, you go down the list, you know, classic songs, Battery, Master of Puppets, even in The Thing That Should Not Be, it's got that Eldritch Abomination feel to it, and it works. Sanitarium, love that riff. The intro, the verse riff, it's still some of my favorite riffs to play. And then, of course, Disposable Heroes. I think a lot of people call Disposable Heroes one of their favorite Metallica songs. I don't love it that high, but it's a great song. Don't get me wrong. Leper Messiah. This is the one. I'm not as crazy. I don't feel like this. You know, it's a little riffy, but it doesn't hit me as hard as some of the other ones do. But decent song. But and then Orion, epic instrumental. And finishing off with Damage Incorporated, which is a very, very kick-ass song. So I think I want to say, and I'm near my 30-minute mark, so I need to hurry it up here. With Master Puppets, it really resonated with me in high school. Listened to it a ton then. I mean, it still does. It's just that over the years, for some reason, I didn't come back to it as much as I did the top 2 picks. I'm sure you already know deductively what 2 albums I'm talking about, but it is, I feel like, a great, for people who come to Metallica for riffs, understandably, it's their top pick. And so, I think the songwriting is excellent. It does have something that bothers me a little bit, in that the feel of the album, it's got an awesome feel, but it's like, it doesn't vary as much as some of their other albums, including the next 2. And so it's, it's still a great, and I get why people love it so much. It's just, for me, it just hasn't resonated. I think kind of what I'm getting at is that Metallica has been one of my favorites, or my favorite metal band, about 20 years. Actually, it's been longer. I think it's about like 23 years. So yeah, it's just that it's Master of Puppets is awesome. It's just not quite as full, complete, what have you. All right, so let's move on to the top 2. So drum roll, you will know exactly what the placement is after Injustice for All, yes. And this is totally amazing album. It's one, talk about coming back to it. I absolutely do. It's the kind of proggier side of Metallica, and talk about epic songwriting. Blackened, just immediately with that kind of that backwards. I don't know if you noticed, but the intro is actually a reversed guitar track, and it just hits you hard. I mean, this is the album they made, of course, after Cliff Burton died, and it's like they came back with a vengeance. It was just very um, obviously expressive and hard hitting, and yet also introducing those prog elements of having like different song structure and you know, I think they changed their tempo quite a few times, and they had to like map it out. Everyone picks on Lars for not being the best drummer. I always say he's serviceable. I don't know why it has to be such a. I don't know. I'm not a drummer, so although a very awesome drummer I know probably knows who I'm talking about, is a Lars fan, and this drummer I know I would take it. I think he is awesome enough that he has room to talk. So, you know, he's out there outside of San Francisco. You know who you are. Justice for All. It's one awesome song after another. Eye the Beholder, one, everyone knows one. And that is a song that, even though it's overplayed, it's still awesome. No matter how many times you come back to it. I'm still not sick of it after hearing it, from, late 80s, early 90s, when I first got into metal. And of course, it had just been released. Still love playing the riffs off of one, listening to it. And then there's just one kick-ass song after another. Shortest Straw, Harvester of Sorrow. I'm not as much into Harvester of Sorrow, I think, as others are, but it's still a good song. It's still a really good song. Freight Ends of Sanity, frigging awesome. That's a little bit of a sleeper track, although I like that they've gotten this habit of finishing when they play Enter Sandman live. They have like the frayed outro, I think it is. So that's awesome. To Live Is to Die, kind of their Cliff Burton tribute. It's moody, but it's also kind of has a kind of a heavy core to it. And of course, ending with one of their all-time great. I think when I rank their songs, this is frequently roughly track number, the second favorite, and that is Dyer's Eve. What a freaking awesome song. And I want to say what I love about it is because not only is it musically amazing, like this is Metallica on full throttle, up to 11, as I say, fast tempo, amazing, riffs and solo. People that crap on Kirk's lead playing, like solo here and elsewhere. He shows that he can both write a great solo and perform one. And it's just balls to the wall Metallica. And on top of it being a great song musically, the lyrics are also just as expressive as James Hetfield gets. I know I said like earlier, like he's really matured as a lyricist, but I think even back then, like packing something that personal into a just frigging high octane song like Dyer's Eve, it's just absolutely. I mean, again, I'd say it's one of my all-time favorite Metallica songs, period. So yeah, Justice for All. It's just, I mean, to say nothing of all the awesome political themes, they were not afraid to go after, McCarthyism and war and, corruption and politics. I still reference the title track when we're talking about corruption and politics. Just one issue after another. They were just, it's a very kind of unafraid, stare you down, both musically and lyrically. Just, it's awesome. It's a totally amazing album with one very glaring flaw, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. For the three of you who don't, it's the bass mix. Like I said earlier, Metallica doesn't always do things for the fans. I'm glad there are things like Injustice for Jason out on the internet, because that's really the only big complaint I can make about Injustice for All, is the bass mix. That's it. It's a totally amazing album. Now that being said, I do feel like the number one spot that you know already. I do think the songwriting is just a little bit more top of their game, and that is number one. Ride the Lightning. Be as dramatic as it can be. This is my favorite Metallica album. This is my favorite metal album. From time to time, I hear people crapping on it. The hell if I know why. this, it kind of has it all. The songwriting, top notch. It's as strong as it is and better, from Injustice for All. Obviously, this is before Ride the Lightning, before Cliff Burton died. So they had Cliff Burton's playing, and they had, I feel like this being their second album, coming off of Kill 'Em All, I feel like they learned how to write great riffs, both with Mustaine and not with Mustaine. I don't know why that's so controversial, just whatever. You can be fans of both bands, it's possible. So I feel like with Ride the Lightning, they kind of set out to prove we can write great riffs, we can write great songs. It's almost like they had a litmus test of like every song has to be packed with very catchy riffs that will keep you coming back, as for me, for again decades. And over the years, like again, Master of Puppets was like my go-to for a long time, but then in the last few years I realized I go back to Ride the Lightning more often. I listen to it more often. I play the songs, and it's got some of my all-time favorite metal songs on it. So yeah, I mean, Fight Fire with Fire, absolutely incredible. Has that kind of pretty like nice and atmospheric intro, and before it just freaking hits you in the head with nuclear holocaust, just and it's just absolutely amazing. And then, not letting up at all, they go into Ride the Lightning totally. And the thing is, like, these songs like kick ass, but in different ways. They have different melodies and tempos, and like you go from like the light to heavy with Fight Fire with Fire, and with Ride the Lightning, the title track, you've just got an amazing lead riff, and it just progresses up and down, builds up, it comes to that really, really awesome solo, and yeah. And then, of course, For Whom the Bell Tolls, great song, of course. I do think it's overplayed at this point. I do think we hear it a little bit too often. That's my one kind of little small gripe with the album. Still awesome. I love, of course, that bass intro. Do 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 do. Fade to Black was one of my favorite Metallica songs for a long time. Still really like it. Of course, it deals with heavy, like depressive and suicidal themes. Still a great song. It hasn't stuck with me as much as some of these other ones, but it's great songwriting. Trapped Under Ice has been a bit of a sleeper. Excuse me. And actually, funny story. I was in college. I'm getting close to 40 minutes. I'm gonna wrap it up if I can. But I was in college I had 3 credits left before I could graduate. I could take any course that I wanted to take on campus, anyone at all. And so the one I picked was History of Rock Music, and which was actually, oddly enough, a demanding course. Lots of being able to link together different genres and see the progression of music, and listening, you have to identify who the artists and genres were, and I think the average grade was a C in the class, but I did quite well. I got top of the class scores, but reason I'm bringing it up is because one of the songs that we listened to as an example, as a go-to example, was Trapped Under Ice. Even though the instructor was, I think he was in his 60s, maybe even 70, and this was 10, 15 years ago. And so you can see this like somewhat elderly, I think he was in his 70s actually. And he was like, all right, let's hear a, example of classic thrash metal. And he turned on Trapped Under Ice. I was like, oh, this is awesome. And listening to it in this huge auditorium, in a class. Yeah, great song. An escape, different vibe. And I used to not like it as much. Like, oh, this isn't as heavy. This is more of a chill song, but it works. The lyrics, I think, become quite applicable as you grow up and you kind of relate to it more. Then we have fucking Creeping Death. And holy crap, I mean, to me, that's just metal to the metal power. It just has one awesome punishing riff after another. I love hearing it live. It's just totally kick-ass. I mean, for my money, metal just doesn't get better when you have a song with one great, because so many songs out there, whether it's metal or anything, maybe has a great intro or verse or chorus or solo or whatever. And Creeping Death is one of those songs that really has it all. It is just back to back, kick-ass songwriting, and I don't get sick of it. And then lyrically, we're talking about the 10 plagues of Egypt. It's just so. If I had to pick a favorite Metallica song, that'd be it. It's just, yeah, I can't sing its praises enough. I'm just total fanboy when Metallica blasts into Creeping Death. And then we end with Call of Cthulhu. And for those of you who know your Lovecraft, you know what this song is about. And very cool atmospheric song. And then when they played it, especially like I liked what they did with S&M too. But I think the original S&M, it was in '99 it came out. That was just freaking epic. How they just, the orchestra really kind of filled in that beautiful, pretty intro and leading into the creepy and as it slowly builds up, like, oh crap, it takes on. It's both atmospheric and kick-ass like at the same time, and just I feel like it's a go-to example of a great metal instrumental. So works great on the album. I think the S&M version takes it to another level. And then of course, I want to say in that version, as it gets quiet and then they blast back again. And then, the strings of the orchestra are building up and then they go into fucking Master of Puppets. That's just, yeah, kick ass. I'm a fanboy out a little bit. So, yeah, there's my number one. Ride the Lightning, Metallica. Doesn't get better. So, hope people out there will listen to this. Put down your rankings, what you liked, agree with, disagree with, think I'm insane. It's all for shits and giggles, right? So, yeah. Metallica, all-time great. What can I say? See ya.